Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today at our speaking series. I would also like to mention that we are having a silent auction. First, I should probably introduce myself, right? My name is Ivy Clark. I'm the executive director here at Newburgh Museum. And we're also hosting a silent auction over a Japanese silk face doll. The bidding will start over there where the LST ship is on the center table if you'd like to look at it on our way out. And thank you once more for being here today, and Jim will tell us more about our future speaking. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Jim Miller. I'm on the board here, and we've got a few people want to introduce us. Ivy introduced herself, so she's executive. We have our secretary, Rosemary, if she'll kind of stand up and wave. See, that's we don't have any more officers, do we? Randy's our media guy. Terry's back there. In that way. John Strange. Anybody else hiding back there? Okay. Welcome to the Newburgh Museum speaker series, second session. These sessions usually take place the first Sunday of each month. Admission is free. To majority or most events, there might be one or so we might have to charge, but however, donations are graciously accepted.
What is each?
I'm going to pass this around.
Hats off to the soldier.
Just pass this down and around. And we do thank you for your generous donations. Keep my eyes from watering. Today's speaker comes to us from the Evansville Wartime Museum. How many of you have been to the Wartime Museum? I guess by now you know they had quite a bit of damage out there, and so it's going to be a while before we can get back in. But our speaker was born and raised in Evansville, graduated from USI with a BS in Social Studies and Secondary Education. Indiana State, he got his MS from Indiana State in Secondary Education. He taught at South Spencer School Systems for 34 years, and he used to give me softball games over there. He is a current member of the Evansville Wartime Museum Board of Directors and is the coordinator of volunteers. So if you would at this time, let's give Mr. Bruce Green, a nice warm welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Jim is a regular with us at the Wartime Museum for our speaker programs, and I am honored to have been asked to come here today and speak at the Newburgh Museum. It's a beautiful museum, and they have done quite a nice job with their World War II exhibits here. So, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to give you a little update on the Evansville Wartime Museum, if you don't mind first. A lot of questions out there about it.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
we did sustain substantial damage to the hangar portion of the museum. A door, one of our hangar doors, and they're huge. If you've been out there, you know those doors are huge. Well, the wind just buckled one of them, pushed it off the tracks. And when that happened, it blew that door in, it blew the roof off. So about half the museum is without a roof, although they're yesterday and today putting a temporary roof on, which should keep us dry until permanent fix can be made there. We did have some damage to our P-47. Not substantial though. That wind pushed a 1.5-ton Army truck. When it pushed that door, it pushed that truck into the wing of the plane. And it did some damage to the aileron on the right wing. They have already taken it off and are going to have it repaired. So it's going to be back in shape, hopefully sometime this summer. None of the artifacts were damaged in the cases. We did lose a lot of signage off the walls, things of that nature, but none of the artifacts were damaged. Some of them need to be cleaned. They had debris that blew onto them and so on. But that morning we went in and we got everything out of the hangar and into the front part of the museum where it was dry. So the curator has gone through all of it and she has found no damage to any of the artifacts. So we're certainly relieved about that. But it's going to be a little while, before they're still assessing damage. They've got to have structural engineers come in and check the structure itself to make sure it's safe and so on before we can allow people back into the museum. So it's going to be probably a couple of months. Okay, sorry. It's going to be a couple of months probably before we can get back in there. We are trying to continue some of our programs. Our speaker program is twice a month on Thursday afternoons. It's a senior program. And we have had several places offer their venues for us to continue that program. So we're looking into continuing it even before the museum is open again. We're continuing our school programs. We had a number of schools lined up to come in and visit the museum here this spring, and we are offering them for us to come to them, and we're putting together a kit of artifacts and information to take to the schools and continue to spread that history. So there's still activity going on, there's still things happening, but there's a lot of work that's going to have to be done to get the museum open again. So
What about the tank ride?
the tank rides right now are on hold, but if they get the doors where they can open and close, then we may be able to go ahead with those once that's determined. But for right now, they're on hold.
Is that the tank that hit that airplane?
No, it was a truck.
A truck?
Yeah, that door wouldn't move that tank.
I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, no, it weighs 32 tons. So. But it did push that truck, which was 1.5 tons. Pretty strong winds, but anyway, I know a lot of people have wondered and had questions. So I'll try to give you a little bit of an update on that. And we will get back up and going again. It just may take a little while. But we appreciate the support from the Newburgh Museum, and they've been very supportive of us and shared our information and so on. So we thank them for that. All right, so I'm going to give you the shortened version of Pearl Harbor because I'm also talking about propaganda today. So in the time allotment I have, I'm going to have to condense. And I am certainly no battle expert. Now, we have guys at the museum that are battle experts. Jason Holmes, he was a professor at Vincennes, and he can tell you every detail about every battle of World War II. I'm not that guy. But I can give you overviews of things, and then I'm going to also talk to you about how propaganda was used in World War II today. So I made my first visit to Pearl Harbor last February. Like everybody that's a history buff, I'd read about it and so on, but I had never been there, and I took a trip there last February. And quite an amazing place to visit when you see it and think about the things that happened there on that morning. Quite sombering and sobering when you stand there and look out and when you're at Ford Field and you still see bullet holes in the hangars. And, you try to imagine the things these guys were going through on that morning, completely unexpected. So, what led to the attack on Pearl Harbor? Well, you got to go back quite a ways into the early 30s. Japan's an island nation, doesn't have a ton of resources, doesn't have a lot of land for raising crops and things of that nature. So the Japanese decide that in order to become a world power as a nation, they've got to expand. They've got to get more land. They've got to have land for raising crops. They've got to have resources like oil to power their industries and so on. So they decide they want to become self-sufficient, and that's hard for a small island nation to do. And they want to become a world power. So, in 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria. Well, that's not showing up there, is it? In the northern part above China. And they did it to gain more land, farmland. And when they invaded, they didn't treat the people very well. Of course, there was a small struggle for Manchuria. It didn't last long. It didn't take long for the Japanese to conquer Manchuria. But they didn't treat the people well. A lot of forced labor in the lands that were conquered by the Japanese, and women were certainly treated very poorly in these invasions. And then they later decide, well, we need more. So in 1937, they moved into China and started the Second Sino-Japanese War. And this is when the United States starts to send supplies to China to help them defend themselves. To get the supplies to them, we were sending them through French Indochina. This was a colony of France. Later we know it as Vietnam. But at the time it was a colony of France, and so we were sending supplies into China from the south through Indochina. The Japanese didn't like that. They didn't like that we were sending them supplies. So what did they do? They invaded French Indochina, took control of it to stop the flow of supplies from getting to the Chinese. So the United States decides we've got to respond to that. We can't allow them to just continue to take over these lands without some kind of a response. So we placed a trade embargo on the Japanese, on Japan. And this cut off a lot of their oil supply and a lot of their resources they were getting from other places. Of course, that angered them. So they joined they signed the Tripartite Pact, which was an alliance with Germany and Italy. And it comes to be known as the Axis Alliance during World War II. So their goal was to create what they called the Co-Prosperity Sphere, to control all of the Pacific. So you see the green line there, that was their goal. We want to control all of this area. Here was the problem with that. The United States had a colony and two territories in that region. The Philippines was a U.S. colony, and we had territories of Guam and the Wake Islands there as well. So That's standing in the way of what they want to do. They know that the entire Pacific fleet, U.S. fleet, is stationed at Hawaii, on Oahu at Pearl Harbor. So they come up with a plan that if we cripple the U.S. fleet, that gives us free rein to do what we want in the Pacific. So they begin moving their fleet toward Hawaii. Now, this was done under total radio silence. You know, early December of 41, they start heading toward Hawaii. 6 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, 2 cruisers, and 9 destroyers. And the weather front helped hide them. They got within 200 miles of Hawaii. And I'm turning my notes here, just in case I get lost. They got within 200 miles of Hawaii, and that was close enough for them to launch their attack. So on December 7th, 1941, in 2 waves, 5 phases of the attack on the Hawaiian Islands and the U.S. Air bases and naval base began. The first wave started at 7:40 a.m. on Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. The first wave had torpedo bombers and dive bombers in it. On the way to Pearl Harbor, they hit Wheeler Airfield, where a number of fighter planes were there. By destroying that, they keep from having any defense in the air. And because it was a surprise, they weren't ready to get those planes in the air very quickly. So they hit Wheeler Air Base on the way to Pearl Harbor, and the first wave happens. And then there's a little bit of a pause in the attack. Then the second wave starts at 8:40 a.m. And in the second wave, they used horizontal bombers. These are higher level bombers that drop their bombs straight down. And they also used dive bombers in this attack. And in this attack, they also attacked the 2 other air bases that were on Oahu, or the 3 other. There was one at Ford Island as well. Kanoa, I can never say that. You can see it. Hickam Air Base, and then there was an air base on Ford Island at Pearl Harbor. So all of those air bases are hit, and the entire attack, minus the lulls, lasted about an hour and 15 minutes. But, and I'm going to have to make sure I get these numbers right on this. This is the Pearl Harbor. So these were Battleship Row here. A lot of ships. This was the Ford Island airfield. In the attack, I want to make sure I get all the numbers right. 2,403 U.S. were killed. Of those, 58 were civilians. 1,178 were wounded. 159 U.S. aircraft were damaged, and 169 were completely destroyed in the different air bases. 16 U.S. ships were damaged. Here's the thing though, only 3 were completely destroyed. All the rest of them were able to return to action at some point during World War II. The 3 that were destroyed were the Arizona, which today there's a memorial over at Pearl Harbor, Battleship Arizona, the Battleship Oklahoma, and the Battleship Utah. So those were the 3 ships that were completely destroyed during the battle. The Japanese lost 29 airplanes and 6 midget submarines. 129 Japanese were killed in the attack, and the first Japanese prisoner of war was taken during the attack. His name was Japanese names. Samakami or something. Anyway, I even looked up the pronunciation on that earlier, but I still messed it up. These midget submarines had 2 men on them, and his submarine got separated from the others, and he lost his way, and his navigational tools weren't working. So they got separated, he ran aground. So he and the other guy that were in there got out and tried to swim away, but at first they put explosives in the submarine to destroy it so it couldn't be captured. The explosive didn't work. As they were swimming, the other Japanese naval personnel that was in the submarine drowned. And he was found washed ashore. They picked him up, interrogated him. They found the submarine. They took it. They actually used it for war bond drives during the war. They took it around the United States, showing people that, here's part of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Let's not forget. Sakamai, that's how it is. Anyway, he survived the war. After the war, he went back to Japan. Now, Japanese culture, a lot of the Japanese thought he should have killed himself. But he didn't. So he survived the war. He went back. He lived to be in his 80s. He became an executive with Toyota. But he became the first prisoner of war. Japanese prisoner of war of the United States. And the attack was not the success they thought it would be. I don't know, maybe they didn't pick the right targets. First of all, their intel wasn't good because none of our aircraft carriers were in the harbor during the attack, which was a blessing for the U.S. Navy. And the damage, when you look at the scope of things, and I hate to say minimal because so many lives were lost, but in terms of the naval vessels themselves, most of them survived and continued in the war against Japan. And they didn't hit the fuel supplies. They didn't hit the repair shops. They didn't hit much of the harbor. So, they didn't do the damage they thought they might. And one of the guys from here at the museum mentioned earlier about Yamamoto saying, we've awakened a sleeping giant. And I've read on that, whether he really said it or not, he did write it in his diary. So that's what he did. That's what they did. Unfortunately for us and them. So on December 8th, 1941, President Roosevelt gives his famous Day of Infamy speech. And after his speech, Congress votes, and the Senate voted unanimously to declare war. In the House of Representatives, there was one no vote. Jeanette Rankin of Montana. She was a devout pacifist and also the first woman elected to Congress. And she voted no. She was the only no vote for war. So at this point, the United States is now officially a participant in World War II. And it's just a few days later that Germany declares war on the United States, and we end up in a two-front war in World War II. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this guy. At the Evansville Wartime Museum, we have a display about George Wilcox. George Wilcox was on board the USS Oklahoma battleship at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. The Oklahoma took several torpedo hits that morning. and within like 12 minutes it capsized. Some got away that were, if they were on deck, but those that were inside, 429 of them died aboard the ship, and one of those was George Wilcox. You see in the picture here, he was 19 years old, and he was the first Evansville, Indiana resident to die in World War II, as he was killed at Pearl Harbor that day. I took this picture of the Oklahoma's victims there, and his name is on the list there. And he was originally, it was like 15 months before they were able to upright the ship and get the remains of the soldiers, that the sailors that were killed out of it. By that time, their bodies had decomposed to the point they were unidentifiable. Because they weren't in, a lot of them didn't have their dog tags on.